I still wanted to practice as a physician, but I wanted to be a healer for a community and not just a patient. The most energizing and rewarding part of what we do is when you can invest in the capacity for someone to show up with their full humanity. You got to be a better listener. You got to be more patient. You got to trust the wisdom you're hearing a bit. For me, there's nothing more spiritually and passionately powerful than someone who is at the effect of social injustice, who is now an architect for change.
All right, Bob, thanks for coming on this episode.
My pleasure.
Yeah. And for a few of these episodes, I'm trying to focus on the theme of the working poor and what it's like to live on the margins of our society, since I think a lot of us and the rest of society don't really understand the challenges and the impact and how to help people move ahead. Mm-hmm. And I have so admired your work over the years. Now, in my 12 and a half years at Homeboy, I got to meet you. You were leading the California Endowment Foundation. And I got to say, you're one of my heroes, because I've met a lot of people at Homeboy who are in positions of authority and leadership, but you walk the talk. You talked about these issues, you put resources behind it, and you put a lot of your personal time and energy behind making the change for people who are struggling in our society. So first of all, I want to thank you for all your support of Homeboy and what you do.
No, thank you. It means a lot to me, Tom. And a mutual admiration society. Just thrilled with what you and Father Greg have done with this institution.
Well, thank you for that. So let me start a little bit more formally. So Dr. Robert Ross, right, is how we address you. So I think that's interesting. So I've heard you tell the story about how you've moved from being a doctor to now in this space of leading a foundation. But can you share with the audience what motivated you and what impacted you along the way?
Yeah, this is how I ended up at the California Endowment was my third career, and I was in philanthropy. My first career path was as a practicing pediatrician on the East Coast. I grew up in New York City in the Bronx. Father Greg and I share some roots there.
Yeah.
Went to med school in Philadelphia and then went on to practice at a clinic, community health center on one side of the river, Camden, New Jersey, and then also in North Philadelphia, which was on the other side of the river. And I love that work. That's all I wanted to do. I grew up thinking I want to be a doctor and I want to work in a community like the one I grew up in, and that was it.
That's right.
And I was having a blast doing that. And the transformational moment for me, Tom, which happens in our lives. You had one.
For sure.
Father Greg has had one. I've had my own. Was the introduction of crack cocaine. And when crack cocaine hit the community I was serving in the mid to late 80s, it really was a burning bush moment for me because the introduction of this very cheap, highly addictive, highly euphoric drug for $5, right, for a hit.
Yep.
And I saw what it did to the community I was serving and the families I was serving. More child abuse, more neglect, more preterm births and low birth weight babies, more domestic violence, more community violence and gun shootings. It was just, and then sexually transmitted diseases. As young women who were addicted to crack were selling themselves. So we saw rates of syphilis and gonorrhea, HIV/AIDS just going through the roof as a result. And I had a moment, I recall, I'll tell you one story that was a particular moment that I still carry with me to this day, is, the middle of the epidemic, and a family had come in. They had 3 kids, all under the age of 5. Beautiful kids. And as I walked in to see the patients to get them caught up on their immunizations and their baby checks and all that kind of thing, I looked at the chart and I realized they had missed the last 2 or 3 appointments and they were behind on their shots, on their immunizations. And I was usually a pretty hard stickler about that with the families I served. And I walk in, and mom's not there, but dad is there. And I'm about to read in the riot act about, hey, you guys are missing appointments. The kids are behind now. You know, what the heck's going on? And he pulls me outside. He said, Doc, can I talk to you for a minute? He's an African-American family. He was a construction worker. He was in his construction boots. And I said, man, what's going on? You guys are missing appointments. And, where's Velma? Right, which is the mom. And he said, well, I came to tell you, I came in to bring the kids in so they can get their immunizations and everything caught up. But Velma got hooked on that crack. Oof. And she shows up every now and then, but she hasn't been the same, ever since. And it got bad enough that I remember it was the week before Christmas that year. Because he's mentioned that he had come home and looked in the closet where he had hidden the kids' Christmas presents at the top of the closet, and they were all gone.
Oh, she sold them, huh?
And she sold them, to support her habit, as an indicator of how bad, things have gotten for her. And, I got to tell you, Tom, it was just like a kick in the stomach.
Yep. Gut punch.
Right. I saw the bigger picture because I was, as a pediatrician, I was attending more preterm births and low birth weight births and, crack babies. These are babies that are born at 26 weeks instead of 40 weeks. They weigh 2 pounds. So I'd seen that impact. But for some reason, that one just kind of hit me. And I just took that home with me that night. And I said, I just prayed on it, Lord, what am I doing with this? Right? And it didn't happen overnight, but it led me to a career change where I left the practice of pediatrics to go into public health. And the reason I did that, after a lot of introspection or reflection, was I was learning about what we know in public health. It now has a name for it. At the time, it didn't have a name for it. The social determinants of health. Yep. What are the community conditions that get in the way of good health, right? That exacerbate poor health. Poverty.
But you saw that on the front lines.
And I saw it on the front
determinants,
line.
Right?
Yeah. I saw particularly with that being blown up through crack cocaine.
Right.
And so I wanted to, I said, I think I want to be, I still wanted to practice as a physician, but I wanted to be a healer for a community and not just a patient. And it wasn't clear to me what that would mean and what that would look like, but that change is what eventually led me to the field of philanthropy in the California Endowment, where at the California Endowment, we learned to view health issues through the lens of community.
Right.
And through the lens of the social determinants, the trauma, the poverty.
I want to get there about that work at the endowment. But what led you, so you wanted to be a healer of community, I love how you say that, to public health in terms of why was that the path? And then why did you then leave that path to
it's interesting. What I did was I left my practice and I did a fellowship with the Robert Johnson Foundation as a health policy fellow for children and youth, right? Still wasn't sure what I was going to do with that. A job opportunity came up to run a children's initiative in Philadelphia that would integrate health, education, social services, right? And so it was really a very good match for what I thought about in terms of transforming the health system that had to be broader and more systemic. So I interviewed for that job. They offered me the job, and then they took it away for political reasons. It was just a political thing. The mayor owed somebody a favor. They said, "Hey, we got to pull this." And I was hot. Because
you wanted to heal the community.
I wanted that job.
And politics got in the way of healing the community.
But when I interviewed for that job, and this is, the Lord works in mysterious ways, right? Closes one door and another one opens. On the interview committee for that position was the commissioner for public health. And he called me after I got the bad news about them taking the job away from me. He said, "Hey, Bob, I know you're not very happy about what happened yesterday, but I loved how you showed up in the interview, and I want you to think about coming to the health department." And so that was how I got into public health.
Yeah.
Was as a result of that.
And how long did you do that role?
Did that role for 5 years in Philadelphia and 10 years in San Diego. So about a 14 or 15-year run of running health departments in Philadelphia and then later in San Diego County. That was my introduction to California. And then I was, minding my business, having a great time doing the job in public health in San Diego when the California Endowment job showed up.
Right.
And so, it's so interesting because you get young people asking, how did you, I want to be like you, and how did you get that career, and how did you plan that? And then it looks so sad when I say, I didn't plan any of it.
Yeah, but you didn't plan it, but
doing passionate work.
But for sure, but you took the risk of changing careers, 3 chapters, as you just said, right? And I think that's a good lesson for others to learn because not most people want to stay with what they know and not take that risk. So thank you for going through that. And I sort of wanted to frame up for everybody your 3 chapters along the way.
Thank you.
How did your first 2 chapters influence then your job of foundation head? You led the foundation, which $2 billion of assets right, for the state of California. So now you have a war chest behind you to put policy into action. So talk about a little bit the formation of those first 2 jobs, and then how did you put your vision forward at the endowment?
Yeah, and I'll say, it's not overstating, Tom. Just say that my introduction to Homeboy was a part of that. Right? And it wasn't just Homeboy; there were other organizations too. But here's what it did for me. When I came to the foundation, I came trained as a pediatrician and a public health physician, right? Those are very data-driven, research-driven enterprises. Right? And so the science kind of leads.
Yeah.
They're also, they're not enterprises or practices that are inclusive of community in a meaningful way. They're inclusive of community in a transactional way.
Right.
But not in a way where you view the patient or the family or the community as an asset. They show up as a problem.
Yep.
Right. And that's
something to fix.
Something to fix. And so my experience in my early years in philanthropy was I had the view that these communities have problems to fix, and we have the money to help you fix them. And it was the wrong orientation for me. I had to jettison that thinking that we had the money, that we were as smart or smarter than they were, and we're going to give you this money to solve this problem the way we're asking you to solve it.
Right.
I'm boiling things down here, but it was a very top-down, arrogant orientation about the field of philanthropy.
Yeah, let me interrupt. That's a good construct because as for 12 and a half years of trying to raise money for Homeboy, there are many foundations who have that attitude.
Yes.
Like, we got the money, here's how you got to go do it.
Right.
And
Homeboy, you jump through these hoops,
Homeboy's always stood up and said, we're going to do it our way. And then thereby we get a bad rap for that we don't play well. But continue, please.
Yeah. So what I've learned over the transformation looks like this from let's take a grant. We were just talking about this, right? Homeboy gets a grant, right? And so that's the unit of intervention for a philanthropic. You have the money, the community or community organizations need the money, and you get to know them through this interaction over a grant request, a proposal. And so when I arrived at the California Endowment, I've got my physician knows best kind of public health top-down, mindset. But it changed for me when I began to meet organizations like Homeboy. Because what I learned from interacting with an organization like Homeboy, and it will sound obviously familiar to you because you've lived it.
Sure.
Right? It was an awakening for me. Right? When we make a grant, we typically think that a grant has a strategic purpose. And it does, right?
Oftentimes.
But what I learned over the years was that a grant obviously has the desired strategic purpose. You give a grant to a homeless shelter to buy more shelter beds, to a food bank to buy more food for hungry people, to help a kid get a tutor in school. Right? That tends to be it's a charitable act. It's God's work. Mm-hmm. It's not a bad grant.
Nope.
Right. But that grant also has a moral purpose. Because in the case of Homeboy, it's not just, okay, I've got homies who need help, which was true. Mm-hmm. But the system that exists is morally bankrupt. There needs to be a better way. It's not that these folks need help. The system's not. Right. It's not just, there's not even enough of the system.
Stacked up against them, for sure.
The system is stacked against them, right? It's the revolving door, right? It doesn't take a prevention orientation. It doesn't take a holistic orientation. So Homeboy and Father Greg took a stand against the system of incarceration and the way it was structured, right? So that's a moral argument, okay? Over the years, I learned, you know what, there's a spiritual dimension too. Every time we make a grant to Homeboy, there's a strategic purpose. This studio, this art studio, right? Homegirl Cafe, right? All that, okay, beautiful. There was a moral purpose because you're asserting a system can work better than when the public dollars are paying for, particularly in prisons. The spiritual dimension, which Father Greg speaks to better than anybody I've heard, allows the philanthropic organization, in this case was the California Endowment, to speak and engage the person who is being benefited by the grant. And that statement is, I see you.
Exactly right.
I see you. I'm not just cutting a check to Homeboy. We're cutting this check to Homeboy because we see you. We hear your story. We've heard your pain, your trauma. You have hopes, you have dreams, you have aspirations. And this is a way for us to express our ability to see you as a human, right? And all that comes with, right? And that's the part, Tom, and I was also going at the same time through my own spiritual growth and development. It's the most energizing and rewarding part of what we do is when you can invest in the capacity for someone to show up with their full humanity.
Right.
Right. We're in the business of doing as a foundations and philanthropy is trying to make democracy work for people. That's really what we're trying to do, right? Capitalism sidelines people, marginalizes people, democracy combines people. How do we make those things work for people and for communities? And the key to that, which I think is a very spiritual dimension, is how good a listener are you? Are you willing to just shut up for a minute and check everything you think you know and just listen?
Yeah.
Right. And sometimes the listening comes from the storyteller themselves or through the organization that's working with these folks. And so that's what's the beauty of the career I had.
You could see all that.
This work.
And then on that point, I just want to say, Homeboy is blessed with many, many generous donors. And I think the common theme is just how you phrased it. It's the belief in this is the right thing to do, that just we're going to see somebody with our investment. Mm-hmm. And Homeboy is unique, I think, among nonprofits that most of our donations come undesignated. Like we can spend the money the way we see fit, and donors trust us on that. And so I think that's why our donors come to us each year and feel good about it. But I want to roll back a little bit. How you express all that, I think is, I love it, spot on. Without naming names, so I'm not looking for that. But like, how hard was it for you to convince your board at the foundation? There's a moral imperative to what we're doing. It's about seeing people, as opposed to I see a lot of board members, even Homeboy board members, keep asking us about our metrics, our KPIs.
Yes.
And when our board member asks us about our metrics, everybody looks at Greg, and Greg just
Yes.
rolls his eyes, and I know I got to jump in with an answer.
Right.
And I sort of, it's like we know people show up every day.
Yeah.
Right. But
Yeah.
How hard has it been for you to get that message through to the board?
The board was very patient with me, and I think this piece of work that we took on at the California Endowment, what are the social determinants of health in a community? And we were helping to redefine what health looked like as a foundation. Because when you mention the term health to people, they typically think of doctors and
sure, physical health, blood pressure,
appointments, and insurance, and all that kind of thing. The research tells us that 80% of what influences our life expectancy, how long you live, how long I live, how long 80% has nothing to do with healthcare. That's what the research shows, right? And so we were at this moment as a foundation, and with this flexible money that I had to work with the board with, to say the community is telling us that having health insurance cards is not enough. I need a health insurance card. Not enough. Okay, I need places to buy healthy food in my community. I need places to exercise. I remember when I got to the foundation, we gave a grant to an organization in Boyle Heights, mostly women, Latino women. They had a walking club. And the gang violence was so terrible during those years. This is, mid-90s in Boyle Heights, that the safest place they could find to walk was in the cemetery. Which on the one hand, it's like, wow, that's really creative. On the other hand, that's catastrophic.
Yeah.
That's sad. Yeah. Wait a minute. That's the safest place in your neighborhood to walk is in the cemetery? Because the gangbangers wouldn't go in there, right? So we were hearing from the community that you need to look at our health in a broader construct, in a broader lens. Get beyond, yes, we all need health coverage, but ... And the research backed that up, right? And so my conversation with the board was, what we're hearing from community leaders who have experiential wisdom is that this is the approach in health we need to take. And what we're hearing from the CDC and the public health researchers is, 80% of what we're doing in health in health has nothing to do with doctors and clinics. So that allowed me and the board to take up a broader view and to think about funding more organizations like Homeboy, who, Homeboy doesn't come at what it does in a silo. It sees the person in the context of a community. And then Father Greg interrogates, as Homeboy does, well, what do you need? And then the elements of the Homeboy Way show up, right? Not because Father Greg fell out of bed and came up with it one morning, but because he's a listener.
Exactly right.
Right? And he employed and acted on what he listened. Tattoo removal, mental health services, anger management, job training, all the elements that make up the Homeboy Way. And guess what? When we as a foundation paid for an evaluation to say, well, how does this Homeboy Way work compared to the probation system or compared to the criminal justice system? And the results. Guess what? It works.
It works.
It's more effective, better impact, better outcomes, cheaper than locking people up, right? So when the board began to, see that, and that didn't happen, overnight, it opened up a new way of philanthropy for us, which was strong, deep, profound, authentic listening and learning from that listening and applying that going forward. And then guess what? Because we were interested in policy change, the Homeboy Way now has a point of view to share with the county board of supervisors, elected officials, Congress.
Yeah. So I want to talk more about that. So look, we're two now retired guys.
Yeah.
So sitting around talking about these things, and so we've
We're
been
just missing the beer, man.
No, for sure. We're a sober spot here. Right. We've been in these battles together, fighting on these issues. How do you see, just as you're talking about that, the part of the solutions are from the wisdom of the community leaders, right? The community-based organizations. Foundation world comes on with resources to sort of to stand them up and move into public policy. And I'm just trying to structure my question around. So then we go to government, and here in California, we have a big government, right? We have big government here in LA County. The LA County budget is $45 billion, so they spend a lot of money, right? And government's an important part. I mean, so foundations can only do so much. Nonprofit, community-based organizations can only do so much.
Yes.
But government's got to have an impact. So with your career of public health and now 24 years at running a foundation, having this vision, what's the solution going for? How do we sort of get government to sort of, obviously the bias of my question is government doesn't do enough to help our population or even listen to the community leaders as to put policy out there. How does that change happen, go forward?
Yeah, I mean, government's in a very weird place right now, right, for reasons that we both know. What I learned in terms of if you want to take someone's story and experience who's been living at the point of injustice, right, and you want to transfer that experience and that knowledge into how policy works, right? People can make this really complicated, particularly in schools of public policy. My shorthand answer, no numbers without stories, no stories without numbers. That by the time you get in front of an elected body that represents a governmental institution, be it at the local level, city, county, state, federal, when you marry what the data and the science and the research says, with the stories of people that have been impacted by that issue, more often than not, you get some degree of success. It's not always a winner, but usually I've rarely seen it not have any impact at all, right? And so an example of that is around the same time we were discovering the Father Greg and Homeboy Way. We did a community health program called Building Healthy Communities, and we picked 14 communities around the state. Mm-hmm. Boyle Heights was one of them. And we're engaging young leaders and community leaders about what do you need in your community to be healthier? And what we heard in the Fresno conversation from young people, a group of young people, was you got to help us fix school discipline. And I remember going to
these were community leaders.
These were young people working with a community-based organization.
Saying you have to fix school discipline.
Yes.
Wow.
And that's what I said. I said, school discipline? Wait a minute. We're a health foundation. You mean like suspensions and stuff? Mm-hmm. What?
Yeah.
Why is that like a health issue, right? And then they went on to say, well, we think this is where the school to prison pipeline begins. This is where kids get criminalized. We said, wow, okay. The board is looking at me like, did you know about this? I said, no, not really. So we started commissioning research on school discipline, suspensions and expulsions, and their relationship to outcomes. And the kids were right. The data was powerful, right? And it was national data, not just Fresno, not just California. It doesn't matter. It was Texas, Pennsylvania. School suspensions and expulsions rates went. If you compare, Tom, incarceration rates to school suspension rates over the period of the 90s in particular, they're going like that.
Yeah. Wow.
So we start engaging these kids. Okay, you're onto something. What do you want to do instead? And they began to give, just like the Homeboy Way, ask the person who's been there, what do you need? And they say, well, stop suspending us and expelling us as the first option. It should be the last option. There should be a healthier option. Mental health services in the school setting, teen peer counseling, courts, teen courts, student courts, right, to deal with accountability and acting out behavior. And so we started investing in a campaign called Schools Not Prisons. And the kids got their way to testify before the state legislature. The rapper activist Common heard about the campaign, and because of his interest in justice reform, he joined the kids
Super.
at the Capitol. And next thing you know, like 8 bills go to Governor Brown, it was Jerry Brown then, his desk to deal with school suspension practices and policies. He signed 5 of them. And I would say over the course from maybe 2002 to 2015 or so, we've seen a 50 to 60% drop in school suspensions across the state. Okay. And so, that's an example of storytelling from kids who actually lived that experience, their frustration, their anger, their activism, right? They're asserting themselves that there's a better way to do this, asserting a moral case that school suspensions and expulsions as the first line of defense in dealing with an out-of-control kid is not the right. And then it leads to a strategic outcome.
Yeah, perfect.
Right? So that was kind of that's been our path. You got to be a better listener. You got to be more patient. You got to trust the wisdom you're hearing a bit.
So that's what you've done in the foundation. So,
yes.
But for public policy folks out there, you would say the same thing to get to the front lines and
I think people's stories matter and the data matters. And we're at it's a tougher time, Tom, because there's so much distrust of government from so many angles. Number one. And number two, particularly ever since, President Trump got elected, science matters less, right? But I still can't come up with a better way of influencing the policy discussion than the combination of people's powerful stories of transformation,
right?
In collaboration with the data and the science and the research.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing all that. I want to talk a little bit about your remembrance of early on Father Greg and Homeboy, and we've been through our own evolution here at Homeboy, and how hard was it for you to get behind Homeboy in terms of the population we serve, and to get people, because there are other foundations out there who stood away, didn't want to help during the tough times.
That old expression, she had me at hello. Homeboy had me at hello. I met Father Greg for the first time. So before I became CEO at the California Endowment, I was on the board for a year. And so that was probably 98, 99. And I first met him after the bakery fire in Boyle Heights, when Homeboy had the bakery. And so here's this Jesuit priest. And I went to Catholic school. I was trained by Jesuits and Christian Brothers.
Oh, there you go.
So, already there's a sense of reverence right here. And the story that he started a bakery because the homies needed jobs was like, wow. Right? I mean, it was powerful.
It seems like it's obvious now. It makes so much sense, but
it's
someone
obvious,
had to start it.
But, most people don't start a bakery with that in mind,
No,
right? And so, I got introduced to the Homeboy Way as a result of that tragedy, the fire. And we went to visit the burned out bakery with Father Greg. And I just said, wow, this guy is amazing. Humility is a powerful thing. Right. And I know we live in a political age where humility is vanished.
Yes.
Right. But I've always been attracted by the power of listening and humility. It's a Martin Luther King thing. It's a Gandhi thing.
Yes.
That's right. Social movements come from listening and humility. Right. And so that's how, I got introduced to Homeboy, and then I became, later I became CEO, and, with staff said, we're supporting these guys. And so later he came up with the idea to do Homeboy Industries at, the Bruno Street. You build something like that. how long did he take for you guys to fill that place up? A week?
A week, right. It went really fast for sure. And I say this, it's a compliment to you, and I think you already answered part of it, but look, the population we work with, a lot of other parts of society want to not deal with it or throw it away. We provide mental health counseling to our folks. Even the county's mental health facilities don't want to deal with our folks, right? And so same thing with workforce development centers and all. And so you obviously saw Greg for his innovation, who he's helping, and you've already said it's a moral issue. But there are times over the years, particularly as early years, where we kept running out of money, right? And though I'm sure people were questioning you, well, why do you keep sending money to an organization that keeps running out of money, right? And so what lessons are in there for other organizations or other foundations?
Yeah, I mean, one lesson is sometimes when you're on this side of the table, meaning you have money and you're in a position to write a check to make a grant. And so sometimes it can be fuzzy about what you're exactly funding, because the funds go to a 501c3, so you're funding an organization technically, but sometimes you're really funding a leader, right? Either the founder or leader of that. And sometimes you're funding an issue, right? And so sometimes it's helpful to be clear about what you're writing that check for, even if it's going to an organization, right? And so when Father Greg came to us and said, hey, we're running out of money, we need more, I had enough of a relationship and a sense of trust with Father Greg that I knew he wasn't spending the money buying Cadillacs.
That's right. All the money was going towards the mission, for sure.
Right. It was going to the mission. And, I'd like to think, it'd be interesting to see how Father Greg would describe this. The way I remember it, Antonio Hernandez, who at the time was CEO at the California Community Foundation, Fred Ali, who was a CEO at the Weingart Foundation, and myself, we realized that Father Greg was approaching us. And we had a conversation about, well, what about the institutional infrastructure and capacity of this thing called Homeboy, right? And it's a thing that a number of us have seen in philanthropy before, where the power, the charisma, the energy of the leader is what you're investing in. Mm-hmm. But because the leader is so committed to the mission of the thing, that the business of the thing gets short shrift.
Yep.
Gets neglected. And it's a hard conversation to have with a founder who is just so impassioned about the mission. I'm getting more people coming to us for help. I need more money to help them, right?
Yeah.
And so we had to have a conversation with Father Greg about infrastructure and the organization. And I don't mind telling this tale. I don't think Father Greg would consider it a tale out of school. But he grumbled.
Maybe probably more than grumbled.
Yeah, he grumbled. There's a little bit of eye rolling. But somewhere, again, the guy's a listener.
Mm-hmm.
And next thing we knew, he decided, well, I need somebody to help me really run this place operationally, so I can be free to tend to the mission, right? And then you showed up.
No, I want to be clear for the record. They brought in another guy to be COO, and then they lost more money that next year.
Is that what happened?
Is that what happened?
Okay,
right.
well,
then I showed up.
I missed that part.
Yeah.
But at some point you showed up.
At some point I showed up, for sure.
And my reaction was, who's this white guy?
Yeah.
But it was a marriage of strengths and capacities and experiences between, your leadership and Father Greg's. And then Father Greg went on to expand the board and show. So now, the board is bigger and stronger. The operations is stronger. Father Greg is still there, preaching the gospel. And then you guys are like humming.
Yeah.
Right. So that was another lesson for us in when you're investing in a powerful leader with a charismatic vision and leadership style, pay attention to the infrastructure and the capacity of the organization.
Yeah.
And that was another lesson.
No, that's right. And I will say again, thank you for willing to help us overinvest in the infrastructure, because a large part of what makes Homeboy successful is people with lived experience in our leadership positions.
Yes.
And to do that means you have to overinvest in terms of almost have redundant number of managers, because they have to learn to be a manager along the way.
Right.
And so we went to you many times over the years saying, help us fund the extra HR position, help us fund the extra operations positions. And you guys were willing to do that since you saw the longer term. But I want to challenge a little bit the way you explained this, not the story, but I think the lesson, look, I've now become obviously a convert with Father Craig. Yeah. And here I'm this hotshot business guy, ran big billion-dollar businesses, but I come in and I'll stand here now and say, why have a reserve? Why have a rainy day fund when it rains every day? If people come in, if people are coming through your doors every day needing food and shelter and housing and clothes, like, how can I sit there and have a big bank account, right? You have to spend it down. And there's a balance there for sure, but I think so much of foundation world is so focused on a balance sheet of a nonprofit, as opposed to, hey, did they make impact with the money they spent? Right? Yeah. And so it's easy to say, hard to do.
Yeah, I mean, not to defend it, but to explain it.
Yeah.
Foundations, we use terms like boldness and innovation and risk taking a lot.
Yeah.
We're not very risky. We're just not very risky as a field. We're cautious. We don't want our name in the newspaper in a bad way.
Right.
And the most uncomfortable place for a foundation to be in is a grant that is a public failure. And there's one of two ways that happens. Somebody steals money, or the organization goes under.
Right.
And all of a sudden your name is in there, right? And then the board, as CEO, the board is looking at you like, how come we didn't see this coming? So that kind of is
I
why,
understand.
It explains why we're so sort of risk averse. I think some of it is just, as it's just good business practice. Running a nonprofit is running a business.
Exactly right.
The tax, as you know, the tax code is different, but it's running a business. There's a balance sheet. But it's good practice to be, and I think it doesn't mean that every nonprofit needs to have a Tom Vozzo necessarily. But this is where it's up to the board of directors to really get a handle on, what are the elements of success for this institution in terms of meeting our mission. And those elements are legal and financial and, hiring and personnel and, paying taxes. I mean, the payroll tax, all that stuff that's not sexy, doesn't seem important to the mission. But boy, when you get in trouble.
Yeah, when you get in trouble,
the whole thing can come
so
down.
let me say this to you. I think you may disagree, or help me get the message out there to board members of foundations and family foundations. In that, look, if I was to take the Homeboy lessons, we don't worry about failure. This is what Greg taught us, right? Just take the person who needs us the most.
Yes.
Which means they're probably going to be defined as a failure.
Yes.
Even Homeboy, as we're so successful, 70% of our folks don't recidivate, but 30% do. Right? And so we're okay with that. And look, as the guy running the organization and constantly looking to raise money and talk to donors, I'd be the guy stressing at night knowing that someone who was in our program, left our program, they weren't abiding by our few rules, and then they went out and did something bad on the streets, and the news media said, well, it was a Homeboy person. And I'm thinking, what's going to happen to donors? What's going to happen to donors? Mm-hmm. And Greg would just calm me down.
Right.
We're not going to demonize people.
Yep.
And that's an important lesson. And I want to marry that with take the business world, take our capitalist world we're in, venture capital, private equity capital, angel fund. They know only 1 out of 10 companies work, so they're willing to have 9 failures.
Yes, yes.
And so what frustrates me about foundation world, be willing to have a failure.
Yeah.
As long as the money's helping people.
Yeah, no, I would agree with that.
They may not sustain a long term, but how do we get more folks to think that way?
Boards of foundations need that orientation, to that mindset. And I think we talk that talk better than we walk that walk.
Yeah.
We talk about taking risks and we talk about, failure. For me, it's not so much a matter of mitigating against failure. For me, there's nothing more spiritually and passionately powerful than someone who is at the effect of social injustice, who is now an architect for change, an architect for change in his or her own life, an architect for change in the system and how systems function.
Sure.
Right? And if as a foundation we can have that orientation, then I think the risk thing will follow.
For sure.
It'll make more sense as to why 20% of the products we support or 30% of the products we support may end up failing. But I think you're right. I think we're at a moment where we need that orientation.
Yeah, good. Me, one last area, which is important, big area, and I've heard you mention faith a number of times. And a large part of me, the Homeboy Way, was me getting on my own faith journey, spiritual journey. And I was very, religious in the corporate world. But in the corporate world, you're not allowed to talk about God. And you're allowed to make all other jokes about people and race and sex and all that stuff, but never talk about God in the workplace, right? And so it's so freeing for me coming to Homeboy and learning from not just obviously Father Greg, but the homies and how they talked about their own spiritual journey. When did you start becoming more comfortable talking out loud about your faith?
Yeah, it took a while. Well, it took a while because I rightly or wrong, my faith journey is mine, not to be shared. And I didn't want anyone to assume that I was trying to impose a set of beliefs on people. So in my latter years, as I knew I was, I'm probably going to be retiring within 3 to 5 years, I got more comfortable with it. Not so much where I was proselytizing about, going to church. But one of the best staff meetings we ever had, staff and grantee meetings we ever had, was I told the audience, which actually was a mixture of grantees and my staff, we were rolling out our Building Healthy Communities campaign, and I shared with them a story about what I often do at lunch, which was to walk from California Endowment to La Placita Church, 2 or 3 block walk. And if I don't have a lunch meeting, and I go to, and I would tell them what would happen when I would go to sit in the back of that church at the noon mass, right? One is I'm having my own sort of spiritual experience. Sure. But I also explained, I said, the other thing I do is I watch other people pray. And for people who are not familiar with this experience, poor people pray hard. And that church is particularly a heavily immigrant church. And as I'm watching them pray hard, right, I'm asking myself, as the president and CEO of the California Endowment, what's she praying for?
Yeah, sure.
What burden is she carrying? Is it fear of deportation? Is it she's worried about making next month's rent? Is it she's got a son who's a gangbanger, or a nephew who's struggling with mental illness, right? And so I wanted that experience at lunchtime. So when I go back to the office, I'm grounded in that.
Absolutely. Right.
Right. And so when I told that story, I got incredible feedback. And no criticism about, well, why are you talking about going to church, right? It was a way of demonstrating humility and a way of demonstrating the power of listening and the power of engaging, right? And so for me, a faith-based approach in the philanthropic setting is about that. It's about listening, about engagement, and the power of people's dreams and the power of their traumas, right? And that we all get better at what we do in philanthropy if we can do that.
Right. Yeah. Good for you for taking that stand.
Thank you, brother.
And thank you for this episode.
Yes, sir.
I appreciate all your support.
Appreciate you.
Thank you.